Okay, so this lesson is 4.60 product property. If you are watching this video without taking the quiz, you need to go take the quiz first and then do this lesson, okay? So we're gonna learn now how to actually solve quadratic equations, also known as finding the x-intercepts, okay? So we use the factored form to find the x-intercepts. Okay? The x-intercepts that we find are also known as the solutions to the equation. So when you're solving for the solutions to the equation, so like when you get x equals whatever, that is also the x-intercept, okay? Once we have the factored form, we must use the zero product property to solve, okay? So this all depends on the factored form. So like your first step always in finding the x-intercepts or solving the equation is you first have to factor it, right? We've now learned many different ways. You've learned taking the GCF, dots, you've learned sum product, you've learned grouping, AC method. There's lots of different methods, okay? And so once we have the factored form, we use the zero product property. The zero product property says that if we have something like this, A times B equals 0, then A equals 0 and / or B equals 0, right? Which makes total sense, right? If you have two things that multiply to 0, one of those things at least is going to have to be 0, right? Because to get 0, you do something times 0, okay? And so in other words, let's put this in terms that probably make sense to you. In other words, set each factor equal to 0, okay? So we're gonna do a couple examples of just setting things equal to 0. Like let's say when you do, like after you factor, you get something like this, x plus 2, x minus 4. What you're gonna do is you're gonna set it equal to 0, and then what I like to do is I like to make a T-chart like this. And each of these parentheses is a factor. So you're going to take each parentheses and set it equal to 0. And now you're just going to solve for x. So on the left side, I'm going to subtract by 2. So I'm going to get x equals -2. And on this side, I'm going to solve for, or add 4. So I'm going to get x equals 4. These are my two solutions, also known as my two x-intercepts. So if I were to like draw a graph, like let's say the graph looked something like this, this right here would be -2, and this right here would be 4, right? So that's what these solutions mean. They give you the x-intercepts, okay? Let's do a few more of just like setting equal to 0 of kind of like different things that you might see. Let's say after you factor, you get 3x parentheses x minus 2. Okay, so obviously in this question, you took out the GCF. Again, you're going to set it equal to 0, and then you still set each part equal to 0. So in this first one, you divide by 3, so we get x equals 0, and then add 2, we get x equals 2. So in this case, there are also two solutions or two zeros, x equals 0 and x equals 2. Let's do another. Let's say you do grouping and you get something like this. X squared minus 2, x plus 3 equals 0. Okay? So again, we're going to set each thing. So we have x squared minus 2 equals 0, and we have x plus 3 equals 0. Now the x plus 3 is super easy, right? We subtract 3 on both sides. We get x equals negative 3, right? And then let's say here we're going to start by adding 2 on both sides, right? Because we want x by itself. We have x squared equals 2. Now to get rid of the squared, remember the inverse of squared is square root. So we're going to square root both sides. Now here's the trick though. When you take the square root of both sides, you actually get 2 solutions, plus or minus square root of 2. So there's actually 3 solutions. There's x equals negative 3, there's positive square root of 2, and there's negative square root of 2. Because when you take the square root, you have to put that plus minus. Okay, so here we actually have 3 solutions. We have the first one, the second one, and the third one. Okay, now one thing real quick for these problems, just to make sure that you know, in order to factor, the equation must equal 0, okay? This is the last thing we're going to go through in the video. So in order to factor, the equation must equal 0. So sometimes in the practice, you may see questions like this. X squared minus 8x minus 6 equals negative 6, okay? So this equation doesn't equal 0. But the way that I can make it equal 0 is I got to move everything to one side. So I'm going to move this negative 6 to the other side. So I'm going to, opposite of negative 6 is positive 6. I'm going to put it under wherever I can combine, so over here. And these cancel out, and actually these cancel out too. So I'm left with x squared minus 8x equals 0. Now at this point, it equals 0. So I'm good to go now to start factoring. Now if you notice, it's only 2 terms. So the way that I'm going to factor is I'm going to take out the GCF. In this case, all I can take out here is an x. So I have x parentheses, well, x squared divided by x is x minus 8, and it equals 0. And then from here, again, we take each thing and set it equal to 0. So what I'm trying to show y'all with this question is like, if you have something on the other side, you got to move it over first. It has to equal 0. Add 8 on both sides, and we get x equals 8. And here are your 2 solutions, okay? If you have questions, let us know. Move on to practice.